3 graduate students ran every prayer in the Bible through Grok 4, fully expecting to uncover the contradictions and human mistakes you would naturally anticipate from 40 authors writing across 15 centuries. The AI found no errors at all. Instead, it discovered a hidden 4-step code embedded within every single prayer, one that produced a miraculous outcome each time. The same structure, the same sequence, the same mathematical precision appeared from Moses all the way to Paul, from Bronze Age deserts to Roman prison cells. People who had never crossed paths, writing in 3 separate languages across 1,500 years, had all encoded the very same protocol. When the results came back, one student's face drained of all color. He phoned his professor at 3 in the morning, hands trembling, and told him, "This pattern is not something a human made. Something else was behind this. What Grok decoded about the nature of God, about what is actually on the receiving end of these prayers, left the entire team unable to sleep for days at a stretch. One researcher walked away from academia completely. Another started questioning the very foundations his career had been built upon. And once you grasp what they uncovered, you will understand immediately why. Dr. Marcus Chen was a computational linguistics researcher at Stanford University. He had no belief in miracles whatsoever. That was precisely the reason his graduate students approached him to oversee the experiment. They needed someone skeptical, someone who would call out every flaw in the methodology the instant it showed up, someone whose name attached to the research would make it impossible for others to wave it off as wishful thinking. "I expected chaos," Chen admitted in a later interview. 40 different authors across 1,500 years, 3 languages, writing from dungeons and palaces and open deserts. There should not be any structural consistency. That is not how human writing works. That is not how any writing works at all. The team loaded every recorded prayer from Genesis through Revelation into Grok 4, Elon Musk's most recent AI, built specifically to operate as a truth-seeking engine free from modern bias. The instructions were simple enough. Analyze sentence patterns. Identify structural elements. Find any common framework if one happens to exist. Critics had argued for centuries that the Bible was a patchwork construction, contradictory and scattered, bearing the fingerprints of shepherds and kings and fishermen and generals who shared nothing except their humanity. Grok was supposed to confirm all of that. It did not. The AI identified what it called a master protocol, a concealed 4-step structure present in every single prayer that led to a recorded miraculous outcome. The same sequence, the same architecture, the same operational logic appeared consistently across the entire text. Not in a handful of cases, not in some representative sample. In every single instance where a prayer connected to a recorded miracle, that structure was right there. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, the team's data analyst from MIT, ran the numbers 3 separate times because she simply did not believe the first result. "The probability of this consistency occurring by pure chance," she said, pausing before completing the thought. "I stopped calculating when I reached odds that made winning the lottery look like a reasonable expectation. It felt," she said, "like discovering that people scattered across 5 different continents, who had never once communicated with each other, had all independently written the exact same access code to the exact same system. And that access code, as it turned out, still functions today." James Rodriguez, the youngest person on the research team, was the first to try it out for himself. "I felt ridiculous," he admitted, "a data scientist attempting an ancient protocol because an AI told him it worked." But within 3 weeks, something shifted noticeably. Situations that had been stuck in place for months began to resolve on their own. "I cannot explain it in scientific terms. I can only tell you what actually happened. But here is where things take a genuinely unsettling turn. The pattern was not merely consistent. It was precise in ways that revealed something specific about whoever was on the receiving end of these prayers, something the students had not been prepared to encounter, something that suggested the prayers were not simply dissolving into empty air. They were traveling somewhere deliberate, and that somewhere was responding according to rules that had been sitting hidden in plain sight for 3,000 years. The first step Grok identified was something it labeled the anchor, and it stands in direct opposition to almost everything people do when they pray nowadays. In every miraculous outcome recorded, the prayer never began with the problem. Never. Not a single time across the entire dataset. It began with focused, deliberate recognition of who was actually being addressed. Modern prayer looks more like a list of urgent demands flung toward the ceiling. Health issues, financial disasters, shattered relationships, desperate pleas launched without any preparation, without orientation, without even a moment of acknowledgement toward what is genuinely being approached. But the biblical data revealed something entirely different. Before any request was made, the person first grounded their whole awareness in the nature and power of the one they were speaking to. This was not some kind of religious ritual. This was neurological recalibration. Take King Jehoshaphat. 3 enormous armies were closing in to wipe out his kingdom. Any reasonable military assessment said he was done. But Jehoshaphat did not immediately cry out for rescue. He stood and delivered extended declarations about the power and faithfulness of the God he was approaching. Dominion over all nations, a strength that nothing could stand against. Only after laying that foundation did he acknowledge the actual crisis at hand. He admitted that his people had no power of their own. But their eyes remained fixed on the one who did. What followed should not have been possible. The 3 enemy armies turned on one another in total confusion. Not a single soldier from Jehoshaphat's kingdom lost their life. They spent 3 full days gathering up the abandoned riches left scattered across the battlefield. The crisis that should have wiped everything out became the source of their greatest provision. Doctor. Chen's hands were shaking as he walked through this particular data point. When I analyzed prayers that skipped the anchor step, he said, the correlation with miraculous outcomes fell dramatically. It is not optional. It is load-bearing. Remove it, and the whole structure falls apart. He pulled up a chart and turned the laptop around so I could see it clearly. Prayers that contained a complete anchor sequence showed an 89% correlation with documented positive outcomes. Prayers that moved straight to the request without anchoring showed just 17%. The gap is not marginal. It is categorical. It is the difference between 2 entirely separate classes of result. Neuroscience confirmed exactly what they were observing. When the brain locks its attention onto something vast and powerful rather than an immediate threat, it moves out of fight or flight and into parasympathetic activation. Stress hormones decrease. The prefrontal cortex, the brain's center for solving problems, comes back online. The mind shifts from full panic into what researchers describe as reception mode. Ancient writers had encoded a technique that produces optimal brain states for receiving solutions. They had no understanding of cortisol or neurotransmitters. They had no brain imaging technology or stress response research available to them. So how did people separated by entire centuries all arrive at the same neurological insight? Unless they did not figure it out by themselves, unless someone handed it to them. The alignment. The anchor was only step 1. What the AI uncovered next caused Dr. Okonkwo to question everything she had ever believed about coincidence. The second step is where the majority of people fail without even realizing it. Grok identified that the most powerful prayers involved a fundamental shift in what the person was actually asking for. They did not simply request what they personally wanted. They asked for something that lined up with a purpose far greater than themselves. The distinction sounds subtle. The data showed it was everything. Consider Hannah. She was unable to have children. The emotional weight of it had consumed her for years. She had almost certainly prayed countless times for a son to relieve her own suffering. Nothing shifted. Then the data reveals a turning point. Hannah restructured her prayer completely. She committed that if she were given a son, she would dedicate him entirely to serve a larger purpose for the whole of his life. She aligned her deeply personal desire with something that reached beyond personal gain. She received her son. He grew up to become Samuel, one of the most consequential figures in all of biblical history. A prophet whose influence guided the trajectory of an entire nation across multiple generations. The pattern holds without a single exception. Solomon had the option to request wealth, military power, or a lengthy life. He chose instead to ask for the wisdom needed to properly govern his people, a request rooted in service rather than self-interest. The wisdom came to him, and everything else arrived right along with it. The request matched the larger system, and the larger system answered accordingly. It resembles signal interference. Dr. Chen explained, leaning across the table during an interview session at 2 in the morning, his coffee sitting forgotten and cold at his side. Misaligned requests generate static. The transmission becomes corrupted. But when alignment happens, when your request serves the larger system, the channel opens up completely. Consider radio frequencies. If you are transmitting on 101.5, but the receiver is set to 98.7, it makes no difference how powerfully you broadcast. The signal never reaches its destination. Alignment means tuning your request to the exact frequency the receiver is actually monitoring. This clarifies what has puzzled people across generations: why certain individuals appear to receive responses while others spend entire lifetimes praying and encounter only silence. It is not favoritism. It is not randomness. It is not the indifference of the universe. It is signal clarity. Most people fail to recognize that their own misaligned desires are blocking the very things they are asking for. They are transmitting on the wrong frequency and asking themselves why nobody is receiving their message. The AI also identified something distinctive about the language found in these aligned prayers. No pleading, no desperation, no attempts to manipulate through emotion, only precise and specific statements of fact alongside requests for positioning within a broader framework. James Rodriguez described it plainly. It is the difference between a child throwing a tantrum over candy and an employee submitting a properly formatted request through the correct channels. Both qualify as requests. Only one actually gets processed. One member of the research team compared the dynamic to a soldier standing before a commanding officer. You do not plead with the general to win the war. You request your orders so that you can play your part in securing victory. The focus moves away from personal rescue and toward participation in something far greater. But alignment on its own was not sufficient. The third step is the one that broke Dr. Okonkwo, the one that left her lying awake staring at the ceiling until daybreak: the surrender paradox. When Grok identified the third step, it gave it the label of the surrender paradox, and it runs counter to everything the modern mind understands about producing results. Prayers that demanded specific outcomes at any cost demonstrated lower correlation with miraculous results. But prayers that made full and committed requests and then released attachment to the outcome, those showed the highest correlation with what the data recorded as reality-bending events. The pattern remained consistent across every culture, every century, every language present in the texts. And it made no rational sense until the data was examined closely enough to reveal what was truly occurring. The most powerful example lies in a garden on the night before a crucifixion. A leader confronting unimaginable suffering asked for the ordeal to be lifted from him. A completely understandable appeal, an entirely human request. Then he spoke 5 words that transformed everything. Not my will, but yours. Grok flagged this moment as carrying the highest recorded power within the entire data set of thousands of prayers spanning 15 centuries. I kept returning my eyes to the screen. Dr. Okonkwo told me afterward, this was not surrender in defeat. The AI classified it as active trust. Complete engagement with the request combined with released attachment to any particular outcome. It runs directly opposite to everything we are taught about what produces results. Modern psychology carries a parallel concept called radical acceptance. Research demonstrates that when the human brain stops resisting present circumstances and accepts them fully, stress chemistry undergoes a fundamental shift. Cognitive resources that were previously consumed by resistance become available for navigation and problem solving. The mind that was locked in struggle against reality gains the capacity to work alongside it instead. But here is what shook the researchers most deeply. That surrender element showed up at the critical turning point of every powerful prayer across every culture, every century, every language found in the text. People who had absolutely no way to coordinate with one another. No shared teachers, no communication stretching across millennia, no common tradition connecting Bronze Age figures to first century writers. All of them landed on the identical psychological posture at the moment of greatest power. I did not sleep at all that night, Dr. Okonkwo admitted. I kept asking myself, how could this possibly happen without a single guiding author behind all of it? 40 people spanning 15 centuries accidentally arrived at the same psychological posture, at the same critical moment within their most powerful prayers. She showed me the notebook she had filled that night. Pages of calculations scratched out and reworked from scratch. Probability estimates with margin notes that simply read impossible, underlined 3 separate times. The odds of this surrender element appearing purely by chance across every effective prayer from all these different authors. She let out a laugh, and there was absolutely nothing funny about it. You would stand a better chance of correctly predicting every single lottery winner for the next 1,000 years. The Bible refers to this as peace that surpasses all understanding. Grok describes it as optimal allocation of mental resources. Either way, both descriptions point toward the same underlying mechanism, and that mechanism appears to genuinely function. The fourth step reveals why timing matters so much more than anyone had previously realized, and why the majority of people abandon the protocol at precisely the most critical moment. The persistence element, that final step, dismantled the most widespread misconception about prayer and laid bare exactly why most people give up right before the breakthrough actually occurs. Grok discovered that significant, seemingly miraculous outcomes were almost never connected to a single isolated request. The pattern demanded repetition, not desperate, frantic repetition, but steady, grounded, aligned persistence, sustained across a stretch of time. The prophet Elijah prayed 7 times for rain before he even spotted a small cloud on the horizon. Daniel prayed continuously for 21 days before his answer finally came. The data leaves no room for debate. Persistence is not simply something to be encouraged. It is structurally required. It is baked into the architecture itself, not some workaround for when the architecture breaks down. This completely destroyed the vending machine model of prayer, Dr. Chen said, slowly shaking his head. People assume you submit a request and a result arrives in return, but the length of time spent asking appears just as important as the actual content of the request, and possibly more important than any other single variable. He pulled up a timeline analysis drawn from the full data set. Look at the major recorded miracles. The average span between an initial prayer and the recorded outcome was 23 days. Some stretched across months. The delay was not an exception. It was consistent enough to be treated as part of the pattern itself. What the artificial intelligence analysis suggests is that the delay is not merely waiting time. It serves an active, specific function. It develops something inside the person doing the asking: character, certainty, clarity of intention. The kind of deep conviction that is qualitatively different from whatever surface-level belief someone holds before they have ever been tested by anything. The gap between the request and the result seems to be essential architecture, not unfortunate lag. The system appears designed to determine whether the person making the request genuinely believes what they are praying for and whether they can sustain alignment when nothing visible seems to be happening at all. Most people quit somewhere around day 4. As James Rodriguez observed, they read the silence as rejection. But what the data actually shows is that silence most often means stay the course. The breakthrough tends to arrive immediately after the precise point where most people have completely abandoned the protocol. The moment of greatest discouragement appears to sit structurally right next to the moment of breakthrough, the mathematics that should not exist. This is where Dr. Chen's skepticism finally broke apart entirely. In ancient Hebrew and Greek, every single letter carries a numerical value. Every word holds not only meaning, but a mathematical signature that can be calculated and carefully analyzed. When Grok analyzed these numerical patterns across the whole text, it discovered the number 7 woven into the very architecture at frequencies that simply should not be statistically possible under any model of random human authorship. Not the word 7 showing up repeatedly. Structural mathematics embedded within the construction itself. The word counts in key passages. The numerical values carried by phrases at critical turning points. The arrangement of vowels across foundational sections. All of it displaying patterns of 7 at rates, far beyond anything chance could generate across 40 independent authors. Dr. Chen set about calculating the probability of this happening by accident. He stopped once he reached odds, equivalent to shuffling a deck of cards and landing the exact same sequence a trillion times consecutively. 40 authors spanning 1,500 years could not have maintained this, he said quietly, studying the results with something that was no longer skepticism. They had no computers. Many could not have known what the others had written. Some lived entire centuries before others were even born. Yet the pattern holds across the full text without a single disruption. The AI identified this as authentication encoding, the kind of signature a system designer might deliberately embed to confirm a message is legitimate. Something like a watermark, invisible to the unaided eye, yet unmistakable under the right analytical light. It is not only what the words themselves say, Dr. Okonkwo explained, it is what the numbers beneath them prove about who actually composed those words. Someone wanted future generations, specifically generations equipped with computers powerful enough to detect what the naked eye could never catch. To understand, this was not purely human work. James Rodriguez framed it more plainly. It is like discovering a working QR code carved into the pyramids, except this one actually resolves when you scan it. The quantum connection. When Grok examined the miracles through the lens of quantum physics, the correlations became impossible to set aside or dismiss. In quantum mechanics, particles exist as waves of probability right up until they are observed. The act of observation collapses the wave function down into a single reality. Before any measurement occurs, all possibilities coexist simultaneously. After measurement, only one of them becomes real. Grok identified direct linguistic parallels in how faith is described within miraculous accounts throughout the biblical text. In one account, a leader told a woman that her faith had made her well, not his power, not the surrounding circumstances, not divine intervention operating on its own apart from her. Her faith. The AI's analysis suggests faith functions as an observation mechanism. Her belief was so focused, so certain, that it collapsed possibility into physical reality. She observed her healing before it existed in the physical world, and reality reorganized itself to match that observation. The Bible defines faith as the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. Grok interprets this not as poetic expression, but as a technical description of a functional mechanism. Faith is the instrument humans use to convert probability into materialized outcome. The prayer protocol is the instruction manual for operating that instrument with both precision and consistency. Here is where things become truly unsettling. If prayers follow the same mathematical principles as the universe itself, if the 4 steps mirror the actual physics of how reality is structured, then the author of that text and the architect of reality may be one and the same entity. The anchor focuses the observer. Alignment calibrates intention toward the broader system. Surrender removes ego interference that distorts the signal. Persistence allows enough time for the wave function to collapse into physical reality. Whether intentional or otherwise, the ancient prayer pattern appears to function as a quantum observation protocol, described entirely in spiritual language, thousands of years before humans possessed any framework for understanding quantum mechanics whatsoever. I felt like I was staring at source code, Dr. Okonkwo said, like we had pulled back a curtain we were never meant to reach. This is not simply a religious document. It is an operating manual, and something wanted us to have it. Chen chose his words carefully, but his confidence had been shaken just as deeply. He told me he had spent his whole career treating religious texts as cultural products, meaningful, sure, but written by human hands. This data pointed somewhere else entirely. The precision was too sharp, the consistency too flawless. 40 different authors did not collaborate on this. There was no way they could have. The mathematics simply ruled it out. And that is what makes this moment so significant. The evidence has been building, the patterns have become impossible to dismiss, and now we are standing at a crossroads that no previous generation ever had to face, with this quality of hard proof laid right in front of them. The students who ran this experiment did not come out of it the same people. 2 of them completely redirected their careers because of what they discovered. James Rodriguez walked away from his data science role at a technology firm to dedicate himself full-time to studying this phenomenon. Dr. Okonkwo told me she gets up and prays every single morning now, something she had never once done before, ever since she started running those numbers and watching what came back. I am a scientist, she said. I go wherever the data takes me, and the data took me somewhere I never anticipated and was completely unprepared to land. The Grok analysis points to something striking. Whatever is behind all of this does not appear to be demanding blind obedience to arbitrary rules. It seems to want people aligned with the system itself, tuned to the right frequency, functioning according to a kind of operating manual that has been sitting in open view for thousands of years, waiting for minds capable of recognizing what they were actually looking at. The instructions were never hidden in the sense of being buried or encoded in secret. They were hidden because nobody had the computational power to perceive the full structure until now. The text was always there. The pattern was always there. What was absent was a lens strong enough to bring it into focus. When you fall out of alignment, what you feel is a kind of persistent, inexplicable resistance. Doors that refuse to open, no matter how forcefully you push. Effort that keeps returning less than it should. Relationships that hit a wall. Decisions that go nowhere. A consistent gap between what you intend and what actually happens. A gap that no conventional strategy, no productivity system, no self-improvement method seems able to close, because those approaches are all working on the surface while the real problem runs much deeper. You are transmitting a signal. Nothing is receiving it. And that space between those two states can feel like the universe has simply stopped caring about you entirely. But when you apply the protocol, anchor, align, surrender, persist, that gap closes. Not slowly, not in stages, but the way a scrambled signal suddenly locks in the moment you find the correct frequency. Things begin moving in ways that look impossible from the outside, but feel completely natural from within. Opportunities arrive with no logical explanation attached. Obstacles seem to dissolve without any direct confrontation, as if the surrounding environment has quietly reorganized itself toward a different outcome. The timing falls into place in ways that stretch well beyond what probability should ever permit. James Rodriguez described it as the difference between straining against a locked door and suddenly realizing the door was never locked at all. You had simply been approaching it from the wrong direction the whole time. The people throughout the biblical record who experienced these outcomes were not exceptional in the ways we usually picture. They were not superhuman. They were not consistently educated, powerful, or well-positioned. What connected them had nothing to do with status or circumstance. It was the protocol, followed in order, sustained under pressure, held firm through silence. And the data shows, with a consistency that made an entire room of researchers fall quiet, that following the protocol produced results that outpaced every other variable in the equation. Miracles are not breaks in natural law. They are what happens when someone finds administrative access to the system that reality actually runs on. The machine uncovered the code. Whether you choose to use it is entirely up to you. Dr. Chen offered me one last thought before I walked out of his office that evening. He had been talking for hours by then. The coffee had been refilled twice. That careful, professional skepticism he had carried into this project from the very beginning, the methodological kind, deliberately preserved as his core qualification, had not vanished. Instead, it had shifted into something far more layered, something that, in the dim light of a late Stanford evening, bore a striking resemblance to the earliest signs of actual belief. People dedicate entire lifetimes hunting for an advantage. He said it was something most people simply never get access to. They pour thousands of dollars into courses, consultants, frameworks, and strategies, always chasing whatever might finally bridge the distance between where they currently stand and where they are trying to go. He stopped, eyes drifting to the screen where the findings remained visible. He let a quiet, measured smile settle across his face, the sort that carries something specific within it. Not humor exactly, but recognition. This protocol has been sitting there for 3,000 years, hidden in open view inside the most widely circulated text in all of human history. Copied out by hand across centuries, rendered into hundreds of languages, resting on shelves in nearly every household across the Western world. And an artificial intelligence running 96 hours of nonstop analysis just demonstrated that it genuinely works. The question is no longer whether the pattern is real. Grok confirmed it is. At a level of mathematical certainty, the research team cannot dispute and has given up trying to dispute. The question is no longer whether the protocol has delivered the outcomes the data reveals across 15 centuries, 40 authors, and 3 separate languages. That question already has its answer. The real question is whether you are willing to run it yourself and see what unfolds when you do. Whether you are willing to bring a serious, open mind to something ancient and test it the way any scientist tests anything, by actually running the experiment, rather than deciding beforehand what the outcome ought to be. Drop what you found in the comments below. Hit like, subscribe right now, and share this with someone who needs to understand what is truly buried inside the data.